Tavush region. Land and Border Challenges by Rouben Galichian, published on May 28, 2024. Some of our compatriots, especially those who live outside Armenia, are not very clear about what is happening in the Tavush region of the country. And the opposition is offering half-truths and even false information about the situation. First of all, let us establish a few international rules. First, if one country occupies another's settlements or villages, this act is governed by specific rules. Occupation itself is not illegal under international law, but it must adhere to certain conditions, including that it must be temporary in nature and entail the protection of civilians and their properties. Even if these areas are devoid of population, the occupation can still infringe upon human rights if it prevents the displaced population from returning to their homes or violates their rights in other ways. Second, but if the initial act of occupation occurs without a valid justification under international law, such as unprovoked aggression rather than self-defense or a sanctioned international intervention, the occupation is considered illegal from the outset. In such a case, the occupation of a neighboring country's territories, even if these areas lack settlements, is considered under international law as an act of aggression and can be illegal. Although direct implications for human rights may not be as immediate or apparent as in the first scenario, such acts impact the rights of the occupied state and its people, potentially leading to long-term human rights consequences indirectly related to the occupation. The Soviet borders between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Tavush region and the Armenian highway existed until independence. These borders were delineated by the Soviet General Staff, and detailed maps, which are entitled secret, were accessible only to a few politicians and individuals who had the necessary security clearance. Soviet-era delineated borders, which are of unusually irregular construction and route, caused the Armenian highway connecting Yerevan to Noyambarian to cross the border 4 times, passing over into Azerbaijani territory and returning to Armenia. For long stretches, the Armenian highway was running very close to the border, or next to the Azerbaijani villages of Ashagi Askipara and Baghanis Irum. In fact, even according to the Soviet military maps, the western strip of the village of Ashagi Askipara and half of Baghanis Irum belonged to Armenia. In some short stretches, the border is actually the road between the two republics, a situation which contradicts all sorts of international regulations and logic, which the USSR had been using in many locations, especially on the road from Goris to Kapan in Syunik region. The road connecting Yerevan to Tbilisi before entering the Armenian village of Voskapar at 4 points crosses over into the Azerbaijani territory and comes back to Armenia. Furthermore, north of the Ashagi Askipara village, for a few kilometers the main road runs next to and parallel to the border. It is abundantly clear that during hostilities, Azerbaijani forces could and did target all local and international trucks and other vehicles on the Armenian highway, resulting in casualties. If we return to the Soviet period, this presented no problem, since these republics were both part of the USSR's brotherly countries. After the initial period of independence, Armenian forces took control of these lands, and the question of ownership was still not properly addressed. As previously mentioned at the start of hostilities, Azerbaijani forces positioned beyond the border began shooting at drivers of cars, tankers, and lorries traveling along the Armenian highway. These lorries and tankers included many international transporters traveling through Armenia. Therefore, to ensure safe passage near the Azerbaijani border and where the road crosses into Azerbaijani territory, a solution needed to be found. After the first year of the war, because of continued sporadic shooting by Azerbaijani forces in these regions, it was decided to take the minimum measures necessary to ensure the safe passage of the transport over Armenian roads by taking control of some of the lands adjacent to the borders. In order to have a secure highway, the Armenian side took a strip of Azerbaijani land east of the highway under their control, so that the traffic on the Armenian road would have some sort of safety. Therefore, in order to secure the safety of the passage, strips of land where the roads repeatedly cross over to Azerbaijani territory had to be brought under Armenian control. Additionally, for the security of the road, the Armenian army built a strong defense line. These strips of lands taken over by the Armenians are shown in green. This also applied to the lands near the Azerbaijani villages of Kermli, next to the Armenian village of Kirans, as well as Kizilhaçili near Berkaber, where Azerbaijan had occupied Armenian lands colored yellow. The Kirans bridge was taken over by Armenia as the bridge and a small piece of land around it had been given to Azerbaijan by the Soviet authorities. An illogical decision, as the road and the bridge were only connecting the Armenian village of Kirans with the highway. The population of the two Azerbaijani-Armenian villages of Ashagi Askpara and Baghanis Irum were derelict, and the two Azerbaijani villages of Kermili and Kizilhachili had left their villages, and at present there are no standing buildings. Therefore, the four villages had been devoid of population. The buildings of the small village of Kermili had been left to the elements, and the makeshift buildings had disappeared, so much so that today Google Maps does not even show a trace of this village on their maps, only pointing to where it had been located. This was the status of the Tavush region from 1992 until March of 2024. Until 2024, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev was strongly opposed to accepting the border stipulated by the Alma-Ata Protocol, saying that they may decide to fall back to the borders drawn at other times. In such a case, Armenia could also have proposed to accept the 1926 borders, whereby the area of Armenia was almost 31,000 square kilometers. Early in 2024, President Aliyev announced that he was accepting the borders mentioned in the 1991 Alma-Ata Protocol. This was shortly followed by his demand that Armenia should immediately return the four Azerbaijani villages of Ashagi Askikipara, in fact over 10% Armenian, Baghanis Irum, in fact half Armenian, Kerimili, and Kizilhachili. The truth is that Azerbaijan was not at all interested in getting back those abandoned and empty villages, where in the small ones there was not even a building intact. His main reason was the neutralization of the Armenian defense lines built just east of the Green Strip. In case Armenia did not agree to return the villages, Azerbaijan might have contemplated initiating a case against Armenia before the European Court of Human Rights, to allege that Armenia disregarded the human rights of the population of those four villages. In return, Armenia could not complain in a similar manner, since although Azerbaijan has occupied over 200 square kilometers of Armenian territory, they contained no settlements to be occupied by Azerbaijan. Nevertheless, Armenia could contemplate a counter-case. Although there may be a case against Azerbaijan claiming that from these occupied heights, Azerbaijan effectively controls the fields, orchards, and lands of the Armenian villagers, who they keep under constant threat by sniper fire and indirect harassment. These are the villages that Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan referred to when talking about the 31 village lands. In Tavush, having agreed to the Azerbaijani proposal to demarcate the border with the maps delineated by the Soviet military staff ruling at the time of the protocol, Armenia abides by the Alma-Ata Protocol and expects Azerbaijan to do so in the following regions, as officially agreed. First, return to Armenia the 8.5 square kilometers lands north of the Berkaber Reservoir. Second, return to Armenia all the territories forcibly taken from Armenia during the incursions of May 2021 and September 2022. This has been agreed to by Aliyev as part of the agreed deal. On the map taken from the Soviet military staff dated 1990, the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan is the one agreed to during the 1970s, and also referred to in the maps in the 1991 Alma-Ata Protocol, through which Armenia and Azerbaijan became independent republics. The border is intentionally extended southwest to give Azerbaijan a short section of the Armenian highway, including the bridge, thereby allowing them to control access to the village. Handing over the road and the bridge to Azerbaijan could not be accepted, as it would make the road unusable for the Armenians. There could only be two solutions. Through negotiations with Azerbaijan, their territory surrounding the road and village were handed over to Armenia, in exchange for similarly sized Armenian land to be given to Azerbaijan. However, it is unlikely that Azerbaijan would accept such a solution, as their actions and announcements illustrate that they are mainly interested in creating problems for Armenia. The alternative would be to reroute the road and bridge, ensuring highway access to Kirans via a new road that avoids the Azerbaijani border. This is the solution implemented by the Armenian authorities. This solution would resolve the access to Kirans, but the psychological problem for the Armenians of this village, having to live 200 meters from the Azerbaijanis, could not be deemed as an agreeable one. Of course, it would possibly be the same for the Azerbaijanis who are to be settled in or near the site of the old village of Keremli.